Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second lecture of the day, our afternoon lecture. We are very, very excited to have this gentleman here. He is, of course, known throughout the galaxies as the godfather of house and as well as Spain. So please, won't you join me in welcoming Mr. Frankie Knuckles.
Thank you very much.
Have you ever had issues with the visual accompaniment in one of your parties not being up to par?
It happens to me all the time.
So how do you handle that? What sort of wisdom can you
I close
bestow?
my eyes and listen to the beat.
Okay, good. There's so much to talk about, but your career obviously has spanned quite a number of different eras and areas, I would say. But DJing, remixing, production. I guess if you had to choose one, is there one that's closer to your heart than the other?
No, they go hand in hand.
Yeah.
At this point, they go hand in hand. I can't do one without the other. I'm fortunate enough to have a dance floor all around the world that I can test my material out on. That's a real big plus. But if I had to choose one before the other, I don't think I could. Because if I choose production, then I don't have a dance floor to test it out on. If I choose a dance floor and not do production, then what have I got other than what everybody else has given me? And there's nothing wrong with that, but I kind of like my stuff too. So.
Well, speaking of your stuff, I think we'll start with a little bit of music just to get us in the mood. This is something from a couple of years ago, which you did, which you've actually, we'll get the story behind it after we hear a little bit of it, but and how it may have affected your life in different ways. Okay. Anyways, this is something by Hercules and Love Affair, and it's entitled Blind, and this is the Frankie Knuckles remix. All right, you just leaned over and said you hadn't listened to that in a minute.
It's been a while. It's been a while.
But this is not that old either.
Well, no, it's not that old, but it's been a while since I've listened to it.
So what goes through your head when you listen to that now?
The first time I actually heard it out, the first time someone actually asked me to play it. Before I worked on it, there's a small story about this record. Before I started working on it, the group approached me about a year before it actually released about doing it. And I was beginning to have some health issues that kind of took me out of the business for a little while. And I kind of sort of put it on the back burner. I told them I'd love to do it, but, I've got to look after me for right now. And they said they would wait. So I was out of it for about 6 months, and then I had another 3 months of rehabilitation and stuff like that to get back up on my feet, if you will. And then I was heading back out on the road, and then they came at me again and asked me if I would do the mix. I thought in 9 months, surely they gave up on it. They moved on with someone else. But they came back and asked me if I'd do it. And so they waited 9 months. I had to do it. So I figured, let me just go and knock this out. I really wasn't into it, but I thought, let me just go ahead and knock it out. So I did, and I just hurried up and ran out on the road. And then I was gone for like a couple of months. And then I landed in Greece, and I was playing a club in Athens, and someone came up to me and asked me to play it, which I was kind of surprised about because I didn't think anything about the song. I just did it, gave it to them, and I left. And the fact that someone asked me about it, and I asked them, how do you know about it? And it was like, well, it's everywhere. Everybody's into it. And I had no idea. Goes to show you how things happen. You can work on a piece of music, and then the minute it's out of your hands, it's out in the universe. And then all of a sudden, somebody will sneak up on you and ask you to play it, and you have no idea that it's there. And the minute I put it on, the whole room erupted. And I had no idea that people knew what it was.
I said you knocked it out, and then you hit the road, so you didn't really, it was kind of an afterthought to you.
It really was an afterthought. I had stopped producing for like about 10 years before that, only because I just didn't see a place for myself in the industry anymore, not for the kind of music I like to make. And so I just pretty much gave up on it. So when the group came after me to do it, I kept saying, "Are you sure?" Because people are not into what I do musically, and they was like, "That's the point. It's been missing for too long. You need to do this for us." And I didn't know these kids any more than I knew anybody else in this room. But I just thought, well, if you want me that bad, okay, fine, I'll do it. But I just did it, and I didn't give it a second thought. And I left and went out on the road.
But as you just said, this is really kind of a nice example of something that's contemporary. It bridges, some of the classic sound of what you've done. Yeah.
I didn't know. Probably like so many of you in this room, you're very passionate about the music that you make and the music that you play, and you have a personal affinity to it. But how you think and you feel about it, you also, there's a voice in the back of your head that says the same thing, that, well, this is how I feel about it. I know nobody else feels the same way. I'm personally attached. I'm so close to it. I can't imagine that anybody else would be as close to it. That's if you're thinking sensibly. You know what I mean? And that's just how I felt about it. But I just didn't see a place for myself in the industry at that point. So I just figured I'll take my act on the road until times get better, and maybe it'll come back around. And this particular song was the coming back around.
It had to be pretty gratifying then.
It is now. It is now.
I guess just in terms of approach, what is your mindset? You've done so many remixes over the years. What is your approach when you're approached about doing something? How much do you take liberty-wise with the original material? How do you tackle it?
I think I'm really fortunate because most artists or other producers that hand the material to me to play with is what I call it. Not just mixing it professionally, but they give me an opportunity to play around with it. They trust me enough with their material. The first thing I think about is, I look for the magic in the song, first of all. And usually the magic is right there in the performance that whoever's singing is giving. If I hear that magic, then it's easy for me to find just what direction to go in with it and how to build the foundation, an even stronger foundation underneath the song, which is what I call it. It's easy to separate what you're building as a track versus what they're doing as a performance. But the challenge is in complimenting that person that's singing. And I'd rather do that than just do me. To me, it's more important to do that for them. It garners you greater acceptance. You challenge yourself in the process, and then you learn something new. And I've learned something new on every song that I've ever remixed or produced. So that's the thing I look forward to.
And who schooled you to sort of come to that approach? How did you get to that point? Because we all learn,
It's a process. It was all a part of my growing up. Okay.
All right.
Here we go. Here we go. Back in the 70s and the 80s, the dark ages, we used to have these things called 12-inch vinyl pieces and albums, full LPs, if you will. And one of the great things about it is that not only could you look at the cover art, but then you can read the liner notes on the back, which basically told you who produced what, who wrote which song, who arranged it, who was in the orchestra, who was in the rhythm section, who the engineers were, who the assistant engineers were. I mean, all this stuff, this is what we did as DJs back in the 70s and the 80s. It taught you a lot about your music and what you were doing. But at the same time, before production, I didn't realize it was actually educating me and getting me ready for this. But I learned about who some of the greatest musicians were and some of the great engineers, so that by the time I did get involved in this, then I knew exactly what to seek out in an engineer if I couldn't work with any of those great guys. But when you start getting remix projects that was engineered by some of these great guys, then you can sit back and you can dissect what they did and find out how they did it and all the rest of it. It's all a learning process. Now, it's not so much a collective effort as it was back then, because now, for the most part, a lot of you guys are working on your own, in your bedroom, and you're learning Ableton and Machine, and you're doing things that way. But I don't know how much fun it is working by yourself versus working with a group of people when you got a group of people around you that are there for you. You got engineers that is helping you shape your sound and perfecting it. And then you've got background singers that are hanging on every note that you've got for them. And then you've got someone as big as Luther Vandross or Michael Jackson, that is sitting there saying, whatever you want, however you want it, I'll stay here as long as you need me. That's the reward right there. And every time you work with somebody like that, or all the engineers, excuse me, not all the engineers, but all the programmers that I work with were all classically trained musicians. So just like they were teaching me music, I was teaching them house music. I was teaching them a different side of what it is they do, and infusing certain ideas like playing a very Debussy-esque kind of play piano over a very thick house track or bass line or something like that. Something that blew their mind, blew mine too, but it's something that they never imagined and or heard of before. But we were doing something new. We didn't know if it would work or not, but it did.
That's interesting. I mean, it's funny because even just, it's only Wednesday, but this whole week, certain things that have come up in conversations up here have echoed other people's conversations as well about collaboration and working together.
It's everything. I think two heads is always better than one. I'm sorry. It is. I mean, you can have a great idea and I can feed off of it, or vice versa. And then he can come in the room and add something to it. And she can come in the room and she can add something to it as well, you know what I mean? And then before you know it, it's so much bigger than the original idea.
You're from the South Bronx originally.
The boogie down.
The boogie down. Can you describe what the South Bronx was like when you were coming up in New York?
Do I really have to? Well, when I was coming up in the South Bronx, rap hadn't happened yet. That only happened after I left. But nothing special, really. It was, I couldn't wait to get out. I mean, the most special thing for me was Luther Vandross right across the street. We used to ride the subway down to Manhattan going to school. I went to the High School of Art and Design. He went to Music and Art. So usually by the time we reached 59th Street, he'd go right and I'd go left. But then we would always meet up in the same place going back home. So, but that was the most special thing for me coming out of the South Bronx.
I mean, it was a tough time for New York City. More or less on the edge of bankruptcy and a lot of other things.
Yeah, it was about to go into default.
Yeah. So where did the music and interest, how was it stoked originally?
I don't know. I think it saved my life some kind of way. It gave me a focus away from anything else that could have possibly taken me under. When you grow up in the inner city like New York, where things are as tough as they are, and I'm sure in some of you guys' neighborhoods or where you grew up at, where it can be as intense, if you've got some kind of focus that will take your mind away from that, and obviously everybody in here is creative, that's why you're here. And I mean, that's the thing that saves your life. And the thing that saves your life is the thing that you should always concentrate on and always try to make better. That's my feeling.
Do you remember which music first sort of caught your ear and sort of became a sort of a saving thing for you, a salvation for you?
Before I started DJing, well, in the beginning when I started, most of the music I played came out of Philadelphia. And the songwriters for most of that music, Tom Bell, Linda Creed, who were like in-house stock writers for everybody from the Stylistics to the Spinners and this one, that, the OJs, all those different people. Excuse me. I was just deeply entrenched in everything that they did, and then on the other side, there was Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson. who wrote everything in Motown in the earlier days. You know, their biggest record, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. You know, I mean, I never got an opportunity to meet, I met Tom Bell, but I never met Linda Creed. She died a while ago. But Nick Ashford and Valerie Simpson end up being my parents in this business pretty much. They're like my father and my mother. And I've got a very close, well, Nick just died about a month or so ago, but I have a very close and intense relationship with both of them. And some of the most prolific songwriters in the world, and just studying what they do up close and personal, even before I knew them. You know, that's when you know your life has come full circle. When you're early on playing these people's music, and then all of a sudden one day you become friends with them, you know, and they become your mentors and they become your teachers, and they guide you, and they look at what you do and say, you know, you've got some great ideas and you are really fierce at what you do, but I'm going to show you something else that's going to make it even fiercer than what that is. You know, that's the best for me. And I had people like that around me all my career.
So when was your first DJ gig? Where? What club? What was the sort of the more steady thing that you had going?
It was primitive. And I think they probably wouldn't appreciate me calling it primitive. But I mean, it was what it was for back then. It was back in 71.
This was where?
In New York City at a club called Better Days. And I wasn't a DJ, but a friend of mine offered me the job because he said that he thought I can do it. The club was already open 5 days a week. Do I keep doing that? Sorry. It was open 5 days a week, but they were expanding to 7. He asked me to do the 2 days because he didn't want to do it. I'd had no records. I didn't think I could do it. He felt that I could. I took the job. 6 months later, I was out of the job, but you know, but it was enough to give me a taste of what it was. But I still didn't think about it seriously. And then Larry Levan, who I grew up with at the time, asked me to come and work with him to do lights for him at the club where he was working at Continental Bass. And doing lights for Larry and watching what he was doing up close, you know, Larry would take these extended bathroom breaks where I'm forced to have to play records while he's at the bathroom. So that's, you know, you're not thinking about it, how it's coming together, or the fact that this is what you want to do, but then all of a sudden you kind of sort of fall into it happily by accident, you know, and then you wake up one day and it's 5 years later and you have to seriously make a decision. Now, back then, the life expectancy of a club DJ, and this is probably going to all sound weird to you guys, was 5 years. You had 5 years to make it and then move on. You know, you're not going to do this all your life because it wasn't a career as it is now. It wasn't a profession as it is now. But you had 5 years to do it, have fun with it, and then move on. And I used to always tell Larry, listen, I'm not going to wake up one day and be 32 years old and still playing records. Now, mind you, I was like about 16, 17. I'm not going to wake up one day and be 32 years old and still doing this. Well, the joke is on me, which is why they always say, you know, man makes plans and God sits back and laughs, because I'm 56 years old today, you know, and I'm still doing it. Things happen for whatever reasons that they do, but, you know, you wake up, it's 5 years later, you know, I got to make a decision about what I'm doing. And before I know it, you know, I'm in Chicago. We opened up the warehouse. I got a piece of the business. I'm like 20 years old. You know, and I'm just having a good time. And that's the only thing I was concerned about, was having a good time and showing everybody a good time. And a few years later, then I reached that point where I had to think about the next logical step in this. You're having a great time playing records and showing everybody a good time, but what's the next logical step? How long can you continue to do this? You know, and that's when I began to think about production.
Just to backtrack for a quick second. Before you had moved out to Chicago, well, who was responsible in part for bringing you out there, and how did you meet that person?
That is so busted. That is so. You just really want to get all of my childhood.
You know, everyone. I think it's pretty compelling.
I don't, but okay. Larry Levan and I, when we were kids, we were real juvenile delinquents in every sense of the word. We meant nobody any harm, I promise you. but we were just, we were roughhouses. And we were about 15, 16. We were at this nightclub where everybody was hanging out, and we managed to get inside. When the party was over, we were leaving there. Everybody was usually hanging out outside out front like you usually do, and then everybody began to disperse. So we were left alone, and we were leaving. We were walking up the street from the club, and there was a pastry truck sitting outside this restaurant on the corner. Larry had the bright idea of the both of us running up inside this truck and grabbing some donuts, because we were hungry. So they had them all wrapped up and stacked up and tied up in cord and stuff like that, because he was obviously making his morning deliveries. This is like about 5:30 in the morning. So we run up inside the truck and we grab a couple of stacks, and now we're running up 2nd Avenue, and we run smack into a police car. Now, there's a friend of ours that used to hang out, just to backtrack a little bit, there's a friend of ours that was at the club that night that used to hang out and used to be at all the parties, especially at the Loft when we were hanging out at the Loft. His name is Robert Williams. So we run smack into this police car. We end up in Central Booking, downtown Manhattan, and because we're juveniles, they send us to juvenile camp. And they would send us to a juvenile camp that's in the South Bronx, about 2 blocks away from my house. So we're sitting in there. I'm nervous. I'm losing my mind. I'm crazy. I'm crying. Larry's sitting back smoking a cigarette and can't be bothered with none of it. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in who's a juvenile counselor to see us. And the person is Robert Williams. Robert Williams was the person that asked me about coming to Chicago to open up the warehouse with him. And he ultimately became my business partner there, just to kind of tie it all together so you know who's who. But he walked in and saw the both of us sitting there and asked what had happened. I was beside myself. I couldn't speak. Hey, I was a little sissy. What do you want? I couldn't get it out. So when he read the chart and he saw what we were there for, he was like, "You two are so stupid." So immediately from that particular point on, he took us under his wing while we were there, and he watched us very closely and made sure nothing happened to us. It seemed like we were in there for years, but we were only in there for 2 weeks. When you're a kid, everything's like it seems like it's so much longer than it actually is. But we had only been there for 2 weeks. Our parents wouldn't come and get us because they figured, hey, listen, you were bold enough to do something as stupid as that, pay the consequences. And hopefully we would learn something from it. That was the last time I was ever arrested for anything. I promise you. But that's how it started. And Robert and I, what happened was Robert originally wanted Larry for the warehouse, but at the time Larry was building the garage. And I was out of work, so I got lucky.
So I guess also just to backtrack just a second, because I guess you were at the Loft that night, or
Which night?
the night when with the pastries?
No, it wasn't the Loft. We were at this club called Stage 45. Okay. It had no DJ. It had a jukebox. This is how far back it goes. Okay. It had to be like 70, 71. Okay. 70.
So I guess just from some of these legendary night spots in New York that so many people read about now who weren't there to experience, what did you bring away from those experiences in terms of your sensibility, your DJing, everything? Can you describe a little for the folks here who, can only read about it or see some pictures online?
I don't know how much I can bring to it. It would be so much easier if I could say, you had to be there, and then just take you there. You know what I mean? I have people asking me all the time, how much different is nightlife now versus back then, or how different are clubs now versus back then. A party is a party no matter the way you go. So there are good parties and there are bad parties, and there are good clubs and there are bad clubs. I think nightlife is pretty much the same. I think technology changes everything. Whereas back in the day, you can step up to a bar and get a free poured drink. Now they're usually measured by some machine, depending on where you are. Sound systems were analog. Now they're digital. The sound was much warmer back then. Now it's a little bit colder. What you listened to mostly was song-based. Now what you hear mostly is track-based. You had singers and groups and orchestras and bands and rhythm sections and everything that made up one particular production. You know, now you have one person sitting in a small room doing it. Saying all that, as much as it's changed, it's still pretty much the same, or vice versa. For me, I've amassed an enormous library of not just music, but from playing all these years, and a lot of vinyl, which I'm going to be getting rid of soon. But apart from that, all these years of playing and all the music that I've had to play is all stuck back here. And the sensibility and the approach towards each particular song and the way I've played it over the years and stuff like that pretty much feeds into what I have to deal with now that's current. And I still apply the same thing. I'm not a showman when it comes to playing. I'd rather be tucked away in a corner somewhere and feeding you what I've got, take it or leave it. Some guys have got to be out front, and they have to have all of this, you know what I mean? And they need to put on a show. I'd rather the music speak for itself, because not everybody has good taste in music, but those who do shine.
At the warehouse, was that more or less the MO for you? I mean, were you tucked away someplace in the room?
Absolutely, absolutely. The DJ booth was constructed on the loading dock at the back end of the room. And a lot of times people come, it was 3 stories, and on there was the basement, there was the main floor, which was where the dance floor was, and then there was the lounges that was upstairs. So when you came into the building, you actually went upstairs, and then you came back down at the back of the building. So when you got to the back of the room and you came down, that room was usually dark or the lights was going, and if it was in the dead of winter, we throw on the exhaust fan, so all of a sudden all that condensation in the room would just turn into natural fog, if you will, and you could hear nothing but the crowd in there, you know, screaming or making whatever kind of noise it was, you know, and that was pretty much it. You know, it sounds like, you know, some people have romantic notions about it. It must have been all of these different crazy things, but it was really, really simple. We just had a fabulous sound system in there, you know, and because of my education in sound with Richard Long, who actually designed the sound system, it always sounded as good.
Was that Robert's and yours vision was it based on anything as far as the stuff in New York, the places in New York, or was it sort of creating this entire new thing, or what was your mindset going into this?
It was Robert's concept to begin with, and it was based on the Loft, on David Mancuso's Loft. It almost became that for me because when I first moved to Chicago, I lived there for like maybe the first 2 years in the building, which was in a remote part of the city that had been abandoned because so much industry and business had moved out of this industrial area and stuff like that, that there was nothing around there. Now it's one of the richest neighborhoods in Chicago because Oprah Winfrey moved in and opened her studio, and then everybody else came following. But back then, in like 77, there was nothing there but me living in that neighborhood. I mean, I'd have to travel so far out of the neighborhood just to get groceries and things like that to bring back there. But the concept was pretty much built on David Mancuso's Loft. And it was strictly membership. We only catered to the membership. Only members were allowed to bring their guests, and if someone wanted membership, they had to be sponsored by 5 of the members that were a part of the organization. And it stayed that way probably the first 3.5 years. After that, it became a free-for-all.
How so?
Well, the doors got slung open to anybody and everybody. Membership was no longer important. But that came on the heels of us opening up on Friday nights. And we did a lot of fraternity parties and special parties for different people. People were able to actually rent the place out on Friday night. And so, and all the talk was about Saturday night there. And everybody was curious. They heard it was a gay club. They heard it was this, they heard it was that. But it was like, no, but it's not about that. It's about the music. You got to come on Saturday. And so a lot of people would sneak in on Saturday nights. And then all of a sudden, it's just the crowd changed. It just turned over. And the membership was no longer important, and the thing that actually forced me out of there or forced me to quit was the fact that it just became dangerous. People were beginning to get robbed on the dance floor at knife point. Hideous things like that. And at that particular point, I just thought, this is no longer the club that my heart was into. So it was time to go.
What were some of the records that were big at the Warehouse initially? Let No Man Put Us Under was big, by First Choice. Mainline by Black Ivory was huge. Oh, wow. It was such a wide variety of music that I used to play there because it wasn't all just R&B and soul. I mean, there was some post-punk stuff I used to play, some Grace Jones things and this, that, and the other. I mean, a little bit of reggae around the edges, some really deep soul. I mean, it was some of everything, literally everything. And when was the first time you heard somebody refer to house music?
Maybe maybe 80, 81, somewhere around there. I was in the car with a friend of mine going to his house out on the south side, and we were at a stoplight, and there was a tavern on the corner that had a sign in the window that said, "We play house music." That was the first time I heard it. Well, I saw it, and I asked him what it was. And he said, "Is that music you play down there at that club?" I was like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "That's house music." And I just said, "Oh, I didn't realize it had a name." And so he was like, "Well, it's the house. It's what everybody calls it." He was like, "It's everybody's nickname for the place." And I just thought, oh. And that's when I felt, that's when I really felt like I belonged in Chicago. That was the first time I actually really, really felt like I was a part of the city. The fact that, people had given it a nickname, and that they thought of me and that music all together, all in one.
There's familiarity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think I also might have read something about maybe record stores locally also using that description, house music, in the stores, or how did that come about? Actually, maybe you can clarify.
Well, I worked at one particular record store, and this record store had a record pool in the beginning, and there are no record pools now, but record pools were basically a place where all the DJs were part of this particular membership, and we all got the same records and shared in, what we got. And this is back when everybody was still playing the same music. Not so much now. But the record pool also opened up a record store, and I became one of the buyers for the store. Because so many different people out of New York, I still travel back and forth to New York City once a week. And I had so many connections for music in New York, and through those connections, I got a job working at the record store and being a buyer. But there were other stores that were beginning to put in these particular sections, Frankie's Picks, Frankie's Warehouse Picks, or Ronnie Hardy's, yada, 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 that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, our store had opened up this whole section called, the house section. And then, when you come in the store, that particular part of the store would be packed. All these DJs, or wannabe DJs, or would-be DJs, would be over there looking for the next big thing. And before I started working there as a buyer, they would buy everything in such small quantities, and I'm looking at all the other guys in the store, that are there to try and, get there early because they wanted to make sure they can get a copy of things. The minute I became the buyer of the store, I tried to make sure I bought everything in a great enough abundance so that everybody could have it. Because it's horrible to go into a record store, and I'm sure some of you guys can probably recognize this. You go into a record store to buy a record, but then only 2 or 3 copies come in, and you're not even considered as one of the people that's going to be lucky enough to get it. That's horrible, isn't it? Isn't that the worst? And I just never felt that kind of thing. So I just always tried to make sure, that there was always enough there. And a lot of times, I would record things, put them on cassette, this, that, and the other, just to make sure that, somebody else can have it. So that we're all on the same page musically, you know what I mean? Because I know that feeling going in. You want it, and somebody's sitting next to you, and they got it, and you can't get it, and they're looking at you like, ha. You know, when you know that you're going to play that record better than they would, you're going to love it more than they did. You know.
And you were playing. You had an ear for the imports as well.
That's what I was basically buying
was,
all the imports.
Okay, yeah. So what was catching your ear at the time?
Things like Martin Circus, Disco Circus, Nick Stryker, a little bit of jazz, a lot of stuff out of Canada, Geraldine Hunt, Can't Fake the Feeling. I mean, all those different things that have been sampled so many times now, and so many different songs have been written to. But a lot of that earlier stuff. Change, right. Lover's Holiday, Paradise, all the stuff that Luther sang on. Yeah.
And I guess if you could describe a little bit about... well,
you weren't lying when you said it gets hot up here.
I told you it gets hot. Yes, that's why we have water here. Refreshments for you
Thanks.
if you need to be replenished.
It's warm up here.
Yeah. This is how we segue into the production. So, you were doing edits as well at this point, or when were you doing the edits?
I started doing the editing when I was still at the warehouse, probably in 1980. I'd say late 79, early 80. A very close friend of mine that was hanging out at the club had just started, he went to school for engineering. And so he came in one day and he said that he was in the part of his class now where they're learning how to edit tape. And so he asked me to give him some songs, some records to take home, and he was going to cut them up and re-edit them. And I was like, okay. So I gave him a handful of records to take home, and he came back with these mixes, these edits that he had done. And I was really, really impressed with what he did, because he really took these songs and he turned them around. And I thought that was fascinating. And so I just thought, maybe I need to try this. But I didn't want to have to go to school to do it. So I was like, give me a splicing block. So he got me a splicing block and some tape, and I bought a reel-to-reel, and I set it home, and I started cutting up everything inside. And that's what started it.
How long did it take for you to get nice with the splicing
Actually,
block?
it didn't take me that long at all, because he showed me just what to look for, where to mark the tape, how to cut it, how to put it together. You know, I picked it up like that, you know, and then I was off and running. Like I said, I was cutting up everything, you know, but then I realized that, you know, you have to think about things like continuity when you're doing stuff like that. You know what I mean? You don't want to just be so repetitive that it's boring. You know, you have to give it something extra that's going to make it pop, so that it isn't just one drone thing going on. You know, and that's when I started playing around with things like rhythm makers and running part of the tape backwards so that it would just add a different effect, and doing things like that. Just, hey, listen, I was probably on drugs half the time anyway, so it didn't matter. You know, I'm just trying to find something different to do, just to keep the dance floor interested and coming back every week.
Right. I mean,
I was young. I could do those things. I'm still here. I can talk about it.
I mean, obviously, in more recent times, the edits, because of technology, everybody does an edit. Everybody wants to try to do edits. Do you have any sort of what's your perspective, I guess, on the predominance of that sort of approach nowadays, from having been there when it was a matter of reel-to-reels and splicing blocks and a lot of physical labor?
Well, that was part of the fun for me. You know, I can't really speak against what technology has brought to it now, because, you know, you guys don't know any different. You didn't know what it was to do that, you know, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to generalize when I say that, but I think if you came from that and then know this now, it'd probably be easier to really form a serious enough opinion about it. The next project I'm working on, I'm going right back into a live facility to do it. And it's probably one of the most expensive undertakings I can do, but I'm really doing it for me. I'm not doing it for anybody else. I'm doing it for me. It's just kind of sort of like getting back to my roots when it comes to production. You know, and I can still utilize every bit of today's technology to do it. But I like the idea of having all these people buzzing around me in the studio and making it possible for me to make my dreams just that much bigger than what I can imagine they are. But when it comes to your approach, and when I look at how everything is done now on a computer, I mean, we work in Pro Tools in our studio, and we have Ableton and Machine and all the rest of this different stuff. And yes, it cuts a lot of corners and it shaves a lot of time off what can be done, because I guess in this day and age, it's all about time. But when you look at it as if time doesn't matter, then it's kind of nice, But you can only do that with your own money. You can't do it with anybody else's money, So that's just my feeling about it. But I mean, I'm lucky to be where I'm at so that I can do that. And if it puts me in a poorhouse, I don't care.
Well, what was the turning point for you then, making that jump from just DJing to actually doing your own records? You were doing some in Chicago at the time as well with folks you still work with now.
The turning point was Jamie Principle.
And who is Jamie?
Jamie Principle is a kid I met. He came in the record store when I was working as a buyer. And this was right after Let No Man Put Us Under came out. And it was doing really, really well. And a mutual friend of ours had brought him in the store and introduced me to him. And Jamie asked me if I would consider producing him. And I had never produced anything on anyone before that. And I was like, you got to be kidding. And he was like, no. He was like, I really want you to do it. He was like, Jose thinks the world of you and think that you're great and that you can do it. He was like, and I've heard the Let No Man Put Us Under, and he's played all these different cassettes of your stuff. And he was like, and I really, really want you to do it. And I told him, again, I've never done this. I was like, I don't know what you expect. He was like, well, listen, he was like, this is all new for me too. And he was like, I've got patience. He was like, I trust you. I know you'll know what to do. And that's how it started. And so when we immediately got started on working on his material, all of his songs were like books, small books. He would come in with pages and pages and pages of lyrics for one song. And I found myself having to just like really throw away a lot of that stuff and trim a lot of it away. It was more than what was necessary, because at the heart of all these songs was so much simplicity, but he had so much going on top of it. So I just figured, let me just kind of sort of thin this out a bit, and just concentrate on what's sweet about it and what's innocent about it and what's natural about it. And that was Your Love when we first did it. And we recorded it in the DJ booth with the power plant on top of it. So
Okay.
talk about not even a real recording studio, in the DJ booth. So
Okay. Can we hear a little bit of Your
Yeah,
Love,
sure.
Sean? Okay.
Thank you. That was 25, almost 26 years ago, maybe 27 years ago. But we've since redone it this year, and it's the current single that we have out now. And I want you to notice the difference in two things. One, how much technology has really changed sound and helped aid us to bring a different reality to it, and how much tempo has changed to how people danced back then to how they're dancing now. Cool.
So you were telling me a little bit while it was playing what your philosophy was in doing this.
This song is so special to so many people, and it's probably the benchmark of house music, I think. It's as I've had so many people tell me, it's probably this single most influential song in house music. When we decided we were going to do it, the one thing I didn't want to do was lose what was really special or magical about it. So sonically, all of that is still. Sonically, what we did was we changed the sound, obviously, and brought it forward. But for the song itself, everything that was magical about it and beautiful that really moved people, we tried to keep that in place, and I think we did all right.
And what did you do this on? What was your gear, or what was your approach?
Well, we just re-recorded everything all over again from scratch, and my partner Eric Cupper lives in Connecticut, so we went to Connecticut and we recorded everything in his studio. He has a really small room, about as big as this sofa, and we cut the vocals there and laid out all the doing that, and we just basically laid out everything. I mean, we have a ton of gear there, but out of all of his gear, there's one. He has a whole sound library that's totally mine. So a lot of times when people hear certain things, they can automatically tell when it's mine just because of certain sound elements that I use. That big fluffy pad and all the rest of the stuff, you know. They're kind of signature things, but that's how we built it. By just diving in the library and again, just trying to stay true to the song itself. Right. We could have done more damage than good if we had tried to do anything else.
Now, by contrast with the original, what did you do when you got in there? You were your first time, more or less, trying to do your own production?
The first time versus this last time? The very first time around, I didn't know what I was doing. The fact that I think I could do it in a DJ booth of all places was crazy, you know, but we pulled it off. You know, that very first version that came out was all off of a cassette. You know, and it did that well. You know, just goes to show you technology at the time. But again, when it came to going back and reproducing it again, being so close to it, it was very, very scary. It was very frightening because I could have done more damage than good to it. And there's been a number of different people that have tried to cover the song over the past number of years, and I can't say that I've been that thrilled with what they had done. So I could have put myself in the same position as the rest of them. I could have hated it as well, but it was a major undertaking. But I'm glad it turned out well.
Can you talk a little bit about you mentioned that the original you recorded in the DJ booth at the power plant. So the power plant was the club after the warehouse.
Yes.
And how long were you there for?
The power plant only ran like 2 years, 2.5 years, because of my focus on production was getting greater. I'm spending all this time with Jamie and working on him and working on his material, and I found that all the money that was coming into the power plant was actually going into production. My production career, me learning how to do things, working on Jamie. I was working exclusively with Jamie, so I mean, all the money I was making, I was spending on him. You know, and more focus ended up going into production than into what I needed to be doing with that club, and so I couldn't do both. I also couldn't DJ at a club and run a club too. It's just impossible. It's impossible because something's going to come up short somewhere, and the club was beginning to suffer. And so to keep it from really suffering, I just decided to close it down and focus more on production.
And then move back to New York.
Ultimately, yeah.
Yeah. To be closer to the business of making music, or
well, I felt like I had done everything I could do in Chicago. There was no more room for me to grow. I got my feet wet as far as production. I mean, I did a lot of remixes and production for people back in the early days, working with Fingers Inc., Marshall Jefferson, Joe Smooth, Chip E. I mean, everybody, you know, doing music for all of them, and there was nothing else I can do. I mean, the industry in Chicago was limited. You know, the industry outside of Chicago was much greater. I had an opportunity to move either to London or move back to New York. Moving back to New York proved to be the best idea. You know, I got on the ground floor at Def Mix, and when I came into it, I came in with a pocket full of remixes that people were asking me to do for them. So I brought something to the table, you know, and just at a time when Def Mix was about to open its doors and try and find its way into the industry, you know, I helped bring it in.
Can you explain what Def Mix is for those who may not know?
Def Mix is a production company that was formed by myself, David Morales, and Judy Weinstein. Judy Weinstein she's my manager, one, but she's also my best friend, and she's the heart of this business and what we do. David Morales most of you probably know who he is. He's my partner, and we started in this together. And in starting this together, the minute we started doing remix work, we didn't realize at the time we were doing it, but we were actually changing the shape of how it's done. Before us, basically, when you did a remix, you worked with what was available to you. By the time we got started, we were bringing in musicians and completely overdubbing everybody's songs and rewriting the music and the tracks to everything. There was no two-note bass lines. There was no, we had to really work with the songs that were there. But then, when you look at the people that we were working with, Mariah Carey was pretty much like David's. For a while, she was like his girl. That was his kind of sort of protege, if you will. He did everything for Mariah, and in between, I'm working with everybody else. So, but what we did was we would take these songs as they were originally written and just completely rewrite the bed of music that they were written to, give them a bit more energy. And that's the kind of production house we were. So we actually changed the shape of how remixes are done. But then Puffy comes along and says, this is a remix. And that they were responsible for it.
Haven't had a discussion with
Puffy?
No.
Say it again.
You haven't had a discussion with Puffy about the that
please no. Please
okay.
no.
Like to be a fly on the wall and that discussion takes place.
Next.
Right. So the remixes, Def Mix, that point in your career, then you're DJing where in New York? What was the big move for you then?
Well, when I got my first record deal, I was playing at I was playing at a club. This is a small situation. There was a group of people that used to be employees in part of Paradise Garage, and they decided they were going to open up Paradise Ballroom in New York City after the garage closed. They somehow pulled me into it. It was very short-lived because the building that they got was a landmark in New York. And with a landmark building, you can't cut into the foundation or do anything like that, change or reshape it. It's against the law. So what they did was they put a truss up in the ceiling to put these lights on. They had to go through the foundation of the building in order to do that, and that was pretty much over with. So at the same time, I get signed to Virgin Records and asked to produce an album, and I'm in the studio now, and I'm working on the very first song for the album, which was the Whistle song. And I get a phone call in the studio telling me that Junior Vasquez had walked out of Sound Factory, and if I would consider coming there and playing. Of course. So I'm thinking, I don't read much into it. I'm thinking, okay, you're going to go play tonight, and that would be it. But at the end of the night, I was offered, residency there, and I accepted it. And after about 6 months later, Junior decided he wanted to come back. They managed to, I guess, iron out whatever the differences were, he and his partners. And he wanted back in, so they came and told me that Junior wanted back and he was coming back. I was heartbroken and a little disappointed, because I'm just really feeling this and I'm just like really caught up in it. But they had told me, they was like, but we've got something special for you anyway. And what happened was they were building Sound Factory Bar. Smaller, tighter, but it was perfect for me. I didn't want a room as big as Sound Factory anyway. I had inherited that room and then inherited everything that came along with it, which was all of Junior's foolishness, but you had to be there. But the fact that they were building Sound Factory Bar for me, building the sounds totally to my specification, and the style of music that I produced and wrote and played. Who would turn down something like that? I think every DJ in the world wants his own room where it's built to his specification. Sonically it works. It's no matter what you put on, no matter what point in the room anyone is standing, it sounds even all the way around. That's pretty much what they did for me. And that's where everything really changed.
And while you were at Sound Factory Bar, the album came out.
The album came
Yeah.
out, did really well. The Whistle Song was, of course, the biggest song off the album. There was 2 singles that came off the album. That was it. Well, actually, there was 3. There was a Whistle Song first, and there was It's Hard Sometime, and then Rain Falls. And then Virgin asked me to do another album. But the strange thing is that Virgin was not ready for that record when it came out. And to this day, I'm kind of sorry that I even gave it to them. Everybody was stammering for it in New York City. They wanted it. There was talk about it everywhere. People were trying to bootleg it or get it anywhere they can. We were very protective of it. Didn't play it everywhere. I mean, I played it at the club, but I had to make sure that nobody was recording it or anything like that. Technology wasn't what it is now, obviously, or else somebody would have had it and it would have been on the internet, before you can take your second breath. But we protected it as best we could. But then, once it came out, they didn't have enough vinyl anywhere. You know what I mean? In New York City, the day it was supposed to come out, they sent, I think in total, 500 copies to just one record store. We had to call Philadelphia. We had to call L.A. We had to call Miami, New Orleans. We called so many different cities to get them to ship what they had to New York City just so that we can have enough to, because the demand was so great for it. And it still wasn't enough.
So that didn't necessarily get you off to the greatest
Well,
foot
thank
with
God
the
everybody
label.
loved the record
Yeah.
and still wanted it.
Right.
For that I got lucky. Thank God people still wanted the record, so for that it was good. The second shipment finally came in, I think, about 10 days later. But that was one of the nightmares of being associated with a major label.
You mentioned one of the big song. Maybe we can just play a little bit of it off the album, just a bit. So you're doing this album.
Oops,
this
thanks.
is how did this become the single for you? Was it an obvious choice based on what you guys were working on, or because you're so obviously you have a passion for songs, yet it's a song. It's also an instrumental, so it's not a song in the maybe more traditional sense.
Actually, it is. And I tell you what, this was like the very first song we actually wrote together. And the very first day that we started working on my album, Eric and I I don't think we had even worked together on anything else before this. And when we started laying out the format for the song, it just fell into place on its own. And the more and more I listened to it, it just kept saying so much. But then there were no words you can put to it. There's just no lyrics you could put to it. And, it's really interesting because my manager kept saying, this is really beautiful. Now you need to write a song to it. And I'm like, no, girl. Sorry. But she got away with that when it came to doing Tears with Satoshi. It was such a beautiful instrumental piece of music. And I kept saying, it's beautiful the way it is. She was like, no, if you wanted to get over, you got to write a song to it. And so, of course, I asked Satoshi if you could have anybody sing on this, who would be your first choice? And he said Robert Owens was his first choice. And Robert Owens happened to be my roommate at the time. So it worked out perfectly. So Robert and I sat up and we worked on the lyrics. And that's what came out of Tears. But then when I started working on the Whistle Song, she tried the same thing again. I was like, no, it's not. Voices are not needed here. The song says everything. All you have to do is close your eyes and then open your mind, and it'll tell you exactly what it's saying. And to me, that's enough. Sometimes, a beautiful piece of music is exactly that. It's a beautiful piece of music, and you can do worse stepping on it with something that's not naturally there.
Do you have a preference as far as Tears go, as the instrumental versus the vocal?
No.
I mean,
I think it's one of the. I think it's one of the. I think it was one of the few occasions that Robert Owens really shined. But, Robert Owens is like a wild horse. Unless you corral him and you ride him and you put up margins for him, he can never sing the same line the same way twice. you you have to take what you get when you get it, and believe me, sometimes it was like pulling teeth trying to get the right performance out of him, and a lot of people that just listen to the music and vibe off it and love it don't realize how much work goes into getting that kind of performance out of someone. You know what I mean? And but you don't want to take anything away from what he's about. You know what I mean? So I mean, I had to constantly put up margins and say work within these framework here. I was like, once you give me that, then I'll give you a couple of tracks and you can go as crazy as you want to, but I need this right now.
Because that's what the material dictated for this particular
Well,
track.
if you're going to write a song, you're going to put a song to a piece of music like that. You need to get what's necessary about the song in place. You need your verses in place and you need your chorus in place. Ad libs are exactly that. They're ad libs. They can go as crazy as they want to with it. They're on their own.
Right.
But to structure it and make it work, when we worked on the lyrics, writing the lyrics for the song, I just thought, well, it's beautiful. It's the beauty of the lyrics matches the music itself. So now your performance have to match that.
Right.
And that was that was like pulling teeth.
You know what? Let's listen to a little bit of this then.
You would think I listen to this music all the time, but I don't. I really don't.
Sounds all right, though, right?
It sounds as good to me as it does to you. I don't. I really don't. And I'm not trying to be flip about it when I say that. You work on a piece of music like this for so long, and then the minute it's out of your hands, at least for me, the minute it's out of my hands, it's out of my hands. It belongs to everybody else at that point. And I just move on, and I keep trying to move forward with what I'm doing. But it's nice when I hear it back like this in this kind of company. It feels good. Not only does it sound good, but it feels good too.
I think one of the cool things about some of the work from this era of yours as well is it's, even though you're a house producer, it's pretty varied. It's very varied in terms of tempo, in terms
Thanks
of
for
style.
recognizing that.
I mean, obviously that was the plan, right? I mean,
I don't know if it was a necessary plan. The last thing, I mean, people are going to judge you for what you do, and that's the sad thing about any kind of art form. People are going to judge you. One thing I never want to be judged for is, or being accused of, is being a one note. I think that can be a pretty ugly thing, because it causes you to start doubting yourself or questioning your own validity. I have a lot of different ideas, and I try to challenge myself on each and every one of them. I know what I'm good at. I know what I'm not good at. And when it comes to anything else, I meet the challenge every time. You have to, because you'd be surprised what comes out in the end. But I just don't want to be thought of as being a one note, which is why I work in a completely different arena now. I'm working at a pace that works well for me. I'm working with everybody I want to work with, and everybody's putting their trust in me to do the right thing by them. And so far, it's working out.
I mean, you mentioned obviously huge success with remixes and production, but then you mentioned, like, when we started this talk, being surprised at being approached to do the Hercules and Love Affair thing, about stepping back. I wonder if you might just spend a moment just saying anything about what that experience was like as far as you adjusting to different changes in your career.
I don't know. It's to be at this a long time, or as long as I have. You get so caught up in living it, breathing it, eating it, swimming it, whatever you want to call it. It's so much part of you every day, that life catches up to you, and you don't realize what it is until it knocks you on your ass, you know. And when it knocks you on your ass, then you have to get back up or stay on your ass. You know what I mean? And when my health began to fail me a few years back or several years back, at the expense of not sounding too preachy or anything, you know, your blessings come in various disguises is what happens. And that song was a blessing in disguise. Because up until that particular point, I had only been on the road, and I figured I'm going to stay on the road until times get better. And maybe the sound will come back around. Maybe people will be interested. Now, mind you, I'm constantly traveling around the world, and people keep asking me, how come you're not producing any music? How come you're not making any music? You know, and personally, I know that I'm not making it because nobody's really interested in hearing it. At least that's what I'm telling myself. You know, but after a while, you know, I don't realize how many people are actually asking me this. Am I doing this? I don't realize how many people are actually asking me to do this, you know, until it finally catches up to me. But then when I was forced to have to sit at home and rehabilitate and convalesce and all the rest of this different stuff, I had plenty of time to think about, well, what are you going to do? And with that particular song, I figured, okay, let me do it, going about what I'm doing. And let me just at least get back up on my feet and get back to work and continue to tour and travel and play and stuff like that. And I'll figure out the rest of it later. Well, the song took off, and that was pretty much it right there. It was like a red flag. It was like, if you don't see this, you don't see anything. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And at that particular point, that's when I decided, okay, well, maybe I can try this again. But I had to also think about the fact that everybody knows the name Frankie Knuckles in this business, and everybody knows what I can do, and they associate a certain sound with my name and what it is that I do. So I figured I need to reinvent myself in order to get back. But I don't want to do it and it be Frankie Knuckles reinvented himself and they automatically see my name first and say, oh, well, we know what we're going to get. We know what it is because we know what he do. So what I had done was I completely reinvented myself alongside my partner, Eric Cupper, as Director's Cut. And we started doing a lot of indie bands and small groups and people that are trying to break into the business. We started working with a lot of these people. I call it a lot of pro bono work because I meet a lot of people all the time all around the world that are trying to either put their first record out, looking for a remix on something that they're doing, even some established artists that haven't worked in a long time. And I thought that Director's Cut would be the perfect launch pad to help everybody. And that's what we do, is we're pretty much a launch pad. You know, we take on whatever projects we believe in and we bring them to fruition. And then we hand them back to that artist and say, listen, if you can't get a deal with this, but it doesn't cost them anything, you know, in the process of getting it done. Because if we hear it and we believe in what it is, then we make it happen. We take it, we get it ready, is what we do. We put a little spit and a little polish on it and we make it ripe and ready, that at least the industry would pay some attention to it. Otherwise, if they tried to get their foot in the door, it would never happen. Mm-hmm. You know, and so that's how I reinvented myself. And over the past couple of years now, there's been a lot more focus being put on who Director's Cut is. And earlier this year, we released our first single with Jamie, which was I'll Take You There. And then that was the first number one single we had this year. And then we had our second one with Human Life, which is In It Together this past summer. Mm-hmm. And Now Your Love. Mm-hmm. So it was a good thing I saw the red flag when I did. Mm-hmm. You know, otherwise I probably wouldn't be sitting here.
I want to make sure. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask a couple of questions. We can open it up for questions at this point. Does anybody have any questions for Frankie? Please wait for the microphone.
This is where we do the Oprah thing.
Yeah. You live in Chicago.
Doesn't that sound like it?
Hi. So it seems like when you first started, like back before, you know, house music was an actual thing.
Before time began.
Yeah. It was, you know, based around disco, real instruments, drum machines hadn't really come around yet. And even I think your sound has like, you know, your signature, like, you know, lushness, like prettiness to it. And then I think after a little while, after the 303 and the 909, everybody's using this stuff. Like the sound kind of got more like harsh, with like the like whole like acid house thing. And I'm just wondering what your reaction was at the time of that sort of sound.
I didn't consciously think about it one way or another. Derek May gave me my first drum machine, which was the 909, and I've been in love with that drum machine ever since. It's at the foundation of what I do. My approach towards the production that I do, especially when it comes to the foundation itself, the bottom end, the kick and the bass line and stuff like that and how they work. My theory is that it should be felt and not heard. Obviously, in certain production and certain things that you do, the way certain songs are written, the music is played, that slap bass thing works because it adds a nice effect. But I just found that for me in house music, especially when you're on a big dance floor in a big room under a beautiful sound system, when you feel that bass come at you versus hear it come at you, it's a big difference. Because when you feel it, it wraps itself around you, and it hugs you, and I've watched it do some pretty amazing things to people on the dance floor versus, a big sledgehammer beating you over there. Maybe that works in techno, or techno-based, music and stuff like that. But you have to be conscious of the kind of sound system that it's also being played on. Most sound systems now are digital sound systems versus analog, and that sound did not work well on analog sound systems. But now that everything is digital, and the way technology has reformed and reshaped everything, what I do, I can make work very well on a digital sound system and sound just as warm as it did on analog.
And you were able to use the 909
I still use the
live,
909 to this day.
in sets, though, as well,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
So you didn't run into the issue that you were describing at at your club.
No, not at all. No, the biggest problem is just learn how to program it. But that was in the early days.
Who's next?
Oh, no, this isn't going to happen. I'm not going to go blank, can we? Oh, fucking kidding me.
He's been waiting all day to ask
Yeah,
this
I actually
question.
have. No, I'm going to go blank. I know it. Okay, well, I know something I did want to ask you anyway. Was that obviously you were a huge part of the disco DJ come up, being a loft baby, as they would have said, and playing alongside some of the greatest DJs, in my opinion, to moving on and doing that obviously 10 years later, 20 years later. But what I would like to know, which did you find, not necessarily more difficult, but controlling a crowd back then to controlling a crowd perhaps in the 80s or the 90s? Because obviously there would have been a pretty significant gap from the music you would have been playing throughout the 70s to obviously more drum machine related music throughout like the late 80s and the 90s. So in terms of like controlling a crowd and keeping the party moving and stuff, did you find either a particular period of time tougher than the other?
It's always tough. I wouldn't even begin to rest and just say, there was a point where it was easy versus it being difficult. The minute you begin to get good enough at what you do that people are beating the path to your door and they're hanging on to everything that you do, it becomes tough. Only because you know that, at least you should know, that people are listening. And it's not always about how technically savvy you are on the equipment or how well you can put two songs together. It's what you play. You can put two records together and they can be slightly off tempo-wise or beat-wise. They didn't completely match. But the next one that's coming is just as great as the one that's finishing. And you'll get a bigger roar every time around. But it never gets easy. It never gets easy. Some nights for me, it feels like the music is playing itself.
And I know I have to ask, I'm sure, the generic question. Well, one of, I'm sure, a million that you've been asked before. Could you please just describe, so I could hear from your own mouth, what the Loft and the Gallery was to you, and what was it, like? I can read about it. Obviously, I've read about it, but I'd love to hear it.
Well, it's probably much like what you read. It was really like home for me. David Mancuso's loft was his house. It's where he lived, day in, day out. And the parties he had there every Saturday night were basically rent parties to pay his rent. David Mancuso was a hippie. He comes on the tail end of the whole hippie movement. You'd walk up in the loft, and as soon as you come through the front door, because they always kept the front door closed, and it was on the second floor. When you come through the door, the DJ booth was right there in front of you. And there's a hallway that leads into the back where the kitchen was. And it was a real kitchen as kitchens go, the stove, the oven, the refrigerator. But there were people back there working, and they had a big garbage can that had all this orangeade that was made fresh by hand that everybody drank, or water, this, that, and the other. But directly in front of you when you come through the front door was a DJ booth. And as you stepped in and you took a peek in there, David Mancuso looked like Jesus. Literally, he looked like Jesus. All you saw was his dark curly hair, and you saw his piercing eyes and the beard. And he would have a flashlight between his legs. And he had his headphone, but David never really put two records together. One would play, it would come to an end, and then the next one would start. And that is still how he plays to this day. But it wasn't that he put the records together or that he didn't put them together. It's what he played. And on the strength of that alone, that's what I learned, is that it's more about what you play, not how you play. But as time has gone on, technically, putting two records together and beat matching and all the rest of the different stuff is really, really essential to what's going on. But at the end of the day, still, it's important what you play. Now, today you can play every big room, big tune that puts everybody's hands up in the air and get a rise out of the whole room, and it just be what it is. Or you can make a significant difference and play some music that really is going to stand out. But where you will run into a problem with that, it depends on where you are, and it depends on the crowd that's in the room. They might not be interested in it. So, when you find yourself playing for an audience with a little bit more mature taste, you find that you can get more longevity out of what you're doing. But I wouldn't suggest trying to do it if you only have a 2-hour set. And that's the biggest problem I run into all the time.
Who's next?
Hi. What do you think about the house music that is done nowadays? And if you're still digging, if you're still searching for...
All the time.
All the time?
All the time.
But what do you
It's a
think about...
never-ending quest for me.
But what do you think about house music that is done for new producers? And
I like some. I hope for more. I wish there was more substance in it, but there's stuff that I like, and there's some of it that's just okay.
do you like to name a few producers?
No.
Actually? Okay.
Don't try it. It might be one of your records. I'm just kidding. No, I wouldn't do that.
Okay.
Just a quick question, because I haven't seen you play recently. What do you play on nowadays when you play out?
You really want to see?
Yeah. USB?
64 gigabytes. Hey, I can carry more records on this than I could when I was carrying vinyl. So it's the convenience. I travel alone these days. My best friend, who used to also be my road manager, died last year, so I'm pretty much on my own out here now. I have to scale things to a point now that's going to make it easier for me to still be able to do the same job I've always done, but not carry so much weight. in the process, you know. So, but everything sounds just as good as they always have. Everything has been transferred and carefully, and sonically it still sounds good. But it's only going to sound as good as the sound system I'm playing on. So,
Yeah, and
but it's all right here.
that's just my next question. What's like one of your favorite systems or clubs? I guess.
To date, my favorite
date.
system in the world to play on is at Cielo in New York. Cielo in New York. It is a Function 1 sound system, but it is perhaps the warmest sound system to date. It breathes so well, whereas most digital sound systems don't breathe. This one really does. It has a warmth about it. And the room is not enormous. Cielo is probably about as big as this room. So when you're in there, if I don't know how many people here have ever been to Cielo, then you know what I'm talking about. It's tight as a drum. It is as tight as a drum. No matter where you're at in the room, it just sounds beautiful. It sounds beautiful. And to me, that's the best sound system today that I've worked on.
Hi, Freddie. So,
There you are.
so your music, your sound has been evolving all over these years. What is the next stage of this evolution? What ideas do you have for the generation which is like maybe 10 years old right now and will start going to clubs in 5-7 years, you know?
I'm sure in 5 or 7 years they won't be discovering me, but I don't know what the next big thing is or what the next thing is going to be.
Or what the ideas you have, you know?
The only ideas I have right now is to just try and stay in this game. And I hate to call it a game, but it is what it is. Some people look at this as a competitive sport, and it's not a competitive sport. Every DJ has his own audience, and you're lucky if you have your own audience. No matter how great or how small, the people that follow you and the people that believe in you, you know, are all the people in the world, or should be all the people in the world, because all you need is believers and people that understand what it is you're trying to do, and that's enough. I was trying to go somewhere with this, and I just lost all train of thought. But that, to me, that's what's essential. You know what I mean? I'm working on this remix compilation for Defected in the House, and they were trying to really take me to task with this thing. And they was trying to make me put it out like 6 months ago, and they only just asked me to do it 3 weeks ago. You know what I mean? And they're rushing me through with clearing certain songs and this, that, and the other. And my whole, you know, and then they're going to tell me what they want me to do and how they want me to do it. You know, so I had to actually take them to task, and I had to tell them, listen, you came to me and asked me to do this project. Why? Because you believe that I can do it. 1. 2, because of who I am. And because of, you know, how long I've been at this. This is why you asked me to do this. So why don't you sit back? And I hope I don't offend anybody when I say this. This is exactly what I told them. Let me fuck this duck. You just sit back and catch the feathers as they start flying. That's pretty much how I put it to them. So hopefully it'll come out next year. So.
Hey. You mentioned earlier that you played like post-punk at one point back in the day and stuff. That's something I have a passing interest in, and I think a lot of people here make dance music would probably have an interest in the kind of early sort of pre-house kind of stuff. I'm just wondering if you might be able to kind of recommend some names, labels, people to check out on that kind of tip. Like I'm into like Liquid, the ESG, this kind of stuff, but maybe some of the lesser known stuff that you were playing back then.
I don't know if I would call Liquid post-punk, but
post-disco or, you know, yeah.
I wouldn't call them post-disco either, but I guess you're probably closer to being right by calling them post-punk.
Okay.
Excuse me. There was Liquid, Optimo, ESG.
Yeah.
There's one particular store in Chicago. I might be able to give you some information about where you can go to them, and because that's where I used to get a lot of my stuff from.
Okay.
because I had a roommate that worked there. I worked in one record store, he worked in that one, and they were basically a punk store. So they had a lot of stuff by groups like Ministry and all the rest of that different stuff, post, quasi-metal, post-punk, this, that, and the other. I mean, all kinds of crazy stuff like that.
Okay.
Maybe I can get that information to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
It's called Wax Tracks, by the way.
Hey, what's up? You mentioned taking a little break from production, or like a 10-year break or so, right? Like earlier. I'd like to know what prompted that exactly. You seem to have said that you felt like there wasn't a place for you, or your kind of music, or what you wanted to hear. Just hoping you could elaborate on that a little bit.
What happened?
Like how you felt at the time, or like, I don't know, just more specifically, like what that means to you, like exactly,
Music was changing.
And this, like,
again,
and what time? Like, is this like late 90s?
This is like late 90s. This is like probably 98. I would say late 97 or early 98, going into 99. Club music was changing. I won't say house music was changing, even though it did to a degree. It was changing. And there was like it's like all these new subgenres were coming along. New York hard house and this, that, and the other. And it was all, trance was really beginning to blow up at that point and stuff, And so the electronica end of it was just coming so far to the front. And anything that was more musical, more soul-based, R&B based, if you will, was getting pushed completely to the back. And at that particular point, I'm still dealing with major record labels. When it comes to production and everything else, they didn't want to know.
Yeah. So like, what about gigs? Gigs still coming through?
Well, the gigs were still coming in.
Yeah.
But it was beginning to get a little difficult because this whole, it's just like a couple of years ago when the whole minimalist thing came along and stuff like that. My management was getting nervous because they're thinking, oh, here comes another subgenre. You're probably not going to get any work for a little while. It's going to be limited how much work you're going to get. But actually, my schedule went into double overdrive because with the promoters and so many of the club owners, they're hearing the same thing over and over and over again everywhere else. You know what I mean? And so here I am sticking out like a sore thumb as I always have musically, and it made a difference. And I think that's the thing that saved me more than anything is that I'm not doing what anybody else is doing. So people know what they're going to get here. And that's not a bad thing. And I think that's what helped save me in the process. But I moved away from production just because I wasn't happy with where music was going. And it was pointless for me to make it unless I'm just making it for myself. And I could have done that, but then, I guess it probably wouldn't have been any more of an expensive undertaking than it would be right now, but it's just I didn't have the presence of mind to think that way back then. So I just figured, take your show on the road, and when times get better, maybe you'll try it again.
You kept touring though, like within those 10
Yes.
years. You were just have you ever stopped DJing? Like,
only when I was forced to because of surgery. Right. Yeah, okay. But other than that, no, I haven't stopped.
I just have one question before we get out of here too. We were talking a little bit earlier, and Larry Levan, Ron Hardy are DJ icons, but you knew them as people. I wonder if you have any feeling of either misconceptions about them. You knew them as people, or they're always discussed on revered as discussed as far as like music fans, DJs, their artistry and whatnot. But you knew them as people. I'm just sort of wondering what your impression is and what their legacy is.
Well, people have their own impression of who they were. And there are people that absolutely love who they were and what they stood for, even though they may not have ever met them before in their lives. And then there are people who will stand in judgment of them. Those are probably going to be the same people that's going to stand in judgment of me when I'm no longer here as well. They were friends of mine. They were human beings. I knew them that way. They had their shortcomings just like we all have our shortcomings. It is what it is. That's life. But they left a legacy behind them, that all of us that are on this side of the turntables, if you will, can benefit from. There's something to be learned. You know what I mean? Regardless of how hard they live their lives, there is still something that they left behind that we can all benefit from. And to me, that's the most important thing. It doesn't matter what somebody else's opinion is of them, good, bad, or indifferent. It's what you take away from it personally.
What do you hope for people to learn from you?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know.
We're still learning.
And hopefully I can keep teaching you something.
Anybody else? I think that's a good place to leave things. So can we all say thanks to Mr. Frankie Knuckles?
Thank you.